Hiya. Thanks for tuning in for another German Street Theatre in Dreams We Wake. My name is Adam, and it's lovely to see you all, wherever you are. Thanks for joining us. So the story I would like to tell you today is perhaps the greatest love story of all time. Often imitated, but never surpassed, it formed the basis for Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. The version of the story I'd like to tell you today comes to me from my Pupi Shami. In Pakistani culture, your Pupi is your auntie on your father's side, and my Pupi looked after me a lot when I was young. Hi Pupi. So that's how this story came to me. So it's passed down through what we would call the oral tradition, which means it's told by word of mouth, from person to person, often passing through generations. So when you listen to this, you might think you've heard a similar but different version of this story, and I think that's part of the beauty of this tradition of storytelling. Everyone adds their little twist, their own personal touch, and so the version I'm going to tell you comes from my Pupi. So this story took place thousands of years ago, in a time even before the Ottoman Empire, and it begins in Arabia in ancient times, and it has travelled all those decades across the deserts, through city squares and living rooms, bedtimes, all the way from the Middle East to my auntie in Pakistan, from her in Pakistan to me in her living room in East London, and now from me to you here on YouTube. So without further ado, I give you the story of Leila and Majnun. So our story begins with Leila and Case. The two of them go to school together and they are madly in love with each other. They form this deep spiritual connection and bond that goes above any kind of ordinary love, to the point where Case becomes famous for his love poetry for Leila. He composes hundreds and hundreds of verses, all dedicated to his love for Leila. And he stands on street corners and shouts this poetry to the world, or tells everyone he meets about how much he loves everything about Leila. Some of the other boys teased Case about his love for Leila, saying that because her skin was dark, she couldn't be considered beautiful. But Case told them that the letters in the Quran are written in black ink, and they're the most beautiful words on earth. So how can someone with dark skin not be called beautiful? And he carried on regardless, reciting this love poetry on the street corners and talking to everyone about Leila. So much so that he gains a reputation and a new nickname. They call him Majnun. And Majnun means like a crazy person, or literally possessed by a jinn or a spirit. So he becomes known as Majnun, the man possessed by the spirit of love for Leila. You know how sometimes when you're really close to someone, you can finish each other's
sandwiches
sentences? That's how deep the bond was between Leila and Case, or Majnun. One day when they're at school and Case Majnun is supposed to be writing his lessons from the chalkboard, but all he can write in his notebook is just Leila's name over and over again. And the teacher notices that that's what he's doing. And so he calls him up to the front of the class to punish him. And he tells him to present his hand. And he's going to take his cane and he's going to beat his hand as punishment. But when each blow landed on Majnun's hand, he found that he wasn't the only one crying out in pain, because Leila also felt the same pain on her hand, and her hand showed the marks from the cane. When Leila's parents found out what was happening, and they found out about this bond between them, they took Leila out from the school and they separated the two of them so that they would never be able to see each other ever again. Many years pass and the two of them never stop thinking about each other until Majnun decides that he needs to do something about the situation. So he disguises himself as a cow herd because Layla's family are a cattle-owning family. And he sneaks into their property disguised as a cow herd, and he finds her father and he asks him for her hand in marriage, and he reveals who he is to him. Layla's father rejects him because he has this reputation as Majnun, this crazy, obsessed person. And so it was that Majnun's love for Layla was the very reason that he was unable to have her. And Layla's brother hears about what's happening, and he comes downstairs, and in anger, he gets into a fight with Majnun. And in the scuffle, Majnun accidentally kills Layla's brother, and he's immediately arrested for murder. The punishment for murder at this time was to be stoned to death. And as people gathered the rocks to stone Majnun to death, Layla threw herself in front of him to save him. And to save his life, she told her father that she would do anything he wanted if they would let Majnun live. Her father asked her to marry somebody else and move far away, and then he would allow Majnun to live. And reluctantly, Layla agrees. And so this further separation between Majnun and Layla drove Majnun into complete insanity. And he took himself out of the town and into the wilderness, where it was said he wandered around reciting his poetry for Layla and otherwise talking complete gibberish. The odd traveller met with Majnun as they passed on their way towards the town, and in this way people learnt how he was doing. And apparently he was unable to make sense unless the subject was Layla, and he would recite his poetry aloud to anyone who would listen, into the sky, into the air. He would write Layla's name on the sand, which would be blown away no sooner than he had finished writing it. So Majnun completely loses his grip on reality. Layla is living with her husband, but she's never happy. She's always sad, crying all the time. And her husband doesn't understand why. Eventually, Layla's husband finds out the reason that Layla is so upset. She tells him the truth, that she is still in love with Majnun, and she still longs for him. And this sends Layla's husband into a jealous rage. And he flies out the door and heads for the wilderness to find Majnun. And when he finds him in the desert, he's overcome with complete anger. He sees red, and drawing his sword, he plunges it into Majnun's heart. He didn't know about the magical bond between Majnun and Layla. No sooner does the blow pierce Majnun's heart, but Layla also feels the pain. And the two of them cry out together, and they both die in the same moment. And their souls go up to heaven, where they're allowed to love each other for the rest of eternity. And that's the end of the story of Layla and Majnun. Thank you for watching.